Dave Kindig became a familiar face as the frontman of Bitchin rides, building a reputation for taking forgotten cars and turning them into custom masterpieces for passionate owners. The formula was simple, a rare build, and it made Bitchin rides one of the most popular custom car shows on television.
Before the fame, before the cameras, Dave Kindig was escorted off his own property, accused of stealing money he never touched. Years later, that same shop became a global phenomenon, running for 11 seasons and airing across 3 continents. Then, without warning, it ended, and everyone assumed it was ratings. It wasn't. The real reason involved a corporate merger, a shutdown platform, and a family left to rebuild everything from scratch, bigger than before. Let's discuss how betrayal, fame, and a decision made far outside this shop all collided to write one of the most misunderstood endings in automotive television. The battle before the fame. Long before television cameras ever rolled through his shop, Dave Kindig faced a threat that had nothing to do with custom paint jobs or chopped roof lines. It came from the very people he had trusted to help grow his business. An investor couple had taken over the company's books, positioning themselves as partners in Kindig's future.
He and Charity they figured it was simply how a business succeeds. Take on an investor, money in the bank. So the investor couple and the wife,
instead of strengthening the business, they turned against the man who built it. Dave and his team were physically escorted off the property they had spent years working inside, locked out of the very walls that held their tools, their unfinished projects, and their entire livelihood. The accusation that followed was devastating. The investors claimed Dave had embezzled $44,000 from the business he himself had founded. For a craftsman who had spent years earning trust one customer at a time, a fraud allegation like this was not simply a legal inconvenience. It was a direct attack on his name, his character, and everything he had worked to build. How does a person fight back when the very people controlling the paperwork are the ones accusing him of the crime? Dave and his wife Charity did not wait for the situation to resolve itself on its own. They borrowed money from Charity's father, hired legal representation, and pushed back against the investors with everything they had. There was no guarantee the fight would go their way. Business partnerships gone wrong can drag on for months, sometimes years, draining every resource a small business has left. Yet within just 3 days, the tables turned completely. The investors were forced out, and Dave regained control of the business that would eventually become known around the world. This early chapter rarely makes it into the highlight reels of Dave Kindig's career, yet it may be the single most important moment in understanding everything that came after. A business almost lost within days of being stolen, then reclaimed just as fast, through nothing more than persistence, borrowed money, and a refusal to back down. It set a pattern that would repeat itself throughout his career. Forces outside his control threatening to take away what he built, and Dave finding a way to fight back, regardless of the odds. Was this a warning sign of how the industry would continue to treat him even after fame arrived? Or was it simply the first test of resilience that would come to define his entire story?
The original was also known to be one of the most expensive cars ever sold by GM, being a Corvette and a concept car.
What makes this moment so critical is not just the drama surrounding it. It is the foundation it quietly laid for everything that followed. Without this fight, without this refusal to be pushed out of his own shop, there may never have been a business left standing to eventually attract the attention of a television network. The shop survived because 2 people refused to let it die when everything pointed toward defeat. And that survival, quiet, legal, and largely unseen by the public at the time, became the first chapter in a much larger saga, one that would one day play out in front of millions of viewers who had no idea how close it came to never happening at all. Consider what it must have felt like during those 3 days. not knowing whether a lifetime of work would end in a courtroom loss, a drained bank account, or a business handed over entirely to strangers. There was no television crew documenting this fight, no dramatic music building toward a satisfying reveal. There was only a family deciding, quietly and privately, that they were not going to let someone else write the ending to their story. That decision, made away from any spotlight, with no guarantee of a happy outcome, turned out to be one of the most consequential choices of Dave Kindig's entire career.
Dave's popularity as one of the most innovative and risky designers in the car industry, Dave's decades-long career in the automotive field,
even though almost none of his future fans would ever hear about it until years later. 11 seasons of success. From the ashes of that early betrayal, something remarkable began to take shape. What started as a local custom car shop grew into a television phenomenon that would eventually air across 3 continents. Bitchin rides premiered and quickly found an audience captivated by the transformation of rusted, forgotten vehicles into rolling works of art. Machines that looked as though they belonged in a museum rather than a junkyard. Over the course of 11 seasons, the show produced more than 150 episodes. An extraordinary run, by any measure in the world of cable television, where most series struggle to survive past a handful of seasons. Few automotive shows manage to sustain audience interest for that long, and fewer still manage to expand their reach internationally. Bitchin' Rides did both, quietly becoming one of the most durable franchises in its genre. How does a regional custom car shop become a global brand?
Dave's earnings from TV and business, on top of other interesting details about his career,
recognized under multiple names in multiple countries. The answer lies in a combination of craftsmanship and storytelling. Every build featured on camera was not just a mechanical transformation, but a narrative arc, complete with setbacks, deadlines, tense negotiations, and triumphant reveals that left both clients and viewers speechless. Audiences overseas came to know the same shop and the same builds under entirely different names. Viewers in the United Kingdom watched it as Kindig Customs, while audiences in Italy knew it as Salt Lake Garage. Different titles, same craftsmanship, same family behind the wrenches. The show aired on Velocity and later Motor Trend, 2 networks built around a passionate niche audience of car enthusiasts who valued authenticity over spectacle. For years, that partnership worked exceptionally well. The network received compelling content that reliably drew loyal viewers, and the shop received a platform that turned Dave Kindig into one of the most recognizable names in custom automotive culture. Behind the scenes, the family business grew in step with the show's popularity, expanding its capabilities and taking on increasingly ambitious builds with each passing season. But success on television rarely comes without complications lurking beneath the surface. Being one of the longest-running shows in its category came with rising expectations, rising production costs, and, as later events would prove, a growing vulnerability to decisions made far outside the shop's control. 11 seasons is an eternity in television terms, a run that most creators only dream about. And yet, when the end finally came, few would have guessed the true reason behind it, because the cause traced back to something happening far away from the shop floor itself. Think for a moment about everything that has to align for a show to last 11 seasons. A shop has to keep producing builds ambitious enough to hold an audience's attention. A family has to keep functioning under the pressure of cameras documenting their every disagreement and triumph. And a network has to keep believing the investment is worthwhile season after season. Very few shows in the custom automotive space have managed to sustain all 3 of those conditions simultaneously for over a decade. That is precisely what made the ending, when it finally arrived, so difficult for longtime fans to understand at first. By the time the show reached its later seasons, It had become something bigger than any single episode or build. It had become a fixture in the lives of viewers who tuned in year after year to watch familiar faces tackle new challenges. Loyal fans did not just watch for the cars, they watched for the people, for the family dynamic playing out in the background of every reveal. That kind of connection is difficult to manufacture and even harder to sustain, which makes it all the more important to understand that when this connection was finally severed, it was not the audience who walked away first. The reason nobody talks about. When Bitchin Rides came to an end, the assumption among casual viewers was predictable. Ratings must have dropped, audiences must have moved on, or the format must have simply run its course after over a decade on the air. None of that was actually true. The real cause traced back to 2022, when Warner Bros. Discovery finalized a massive corporate merger that reshaped the entire media landscape almost overnight. As part of sweeping cost-cutting measures that followed the merger, Motor Trend Plus, the streaming platform closely tied to the network airing Bitchin Rides, was shut down entirely. Programming that once lived comfortably on that platform was folded into Discovery Plus and, eventually, into Max, as the newly merged company consolidated its offerings and eliminated redundant services. What does it mean when a hit show gets caught in the crossfire of a corporate restructuring that has no connection whatsoever to its content? It means that no amount of viewer loyalty, no amount of critical praise, and no amount of production quality can protect a show from decisions made by executives focused entirely on balance sheets and shareholder value. Bitchin Rides was not a failing product being cut for lack of interest. It was a casualty of a platform being dismantled around it, caught in the wreckage of a decision made in an entirely different industry conversation. This distinction matters enormously, and it is one that rarely gets the attention it deserves. A show canceled for poor performance sends one message to its creators: evolve, improve, or move on to something new. A show ended because the platform beneath it collapsed sends an entirely different message: that even genuine success can be undone by forces with no connection whatsoever to craftsmanship, creativity, or audience engagement. For a family business that had weathered betrayal, lawsuits, and economic uncertainty just to get a show on the air in the first place, watching it end for a reason completely outside their control must have felt like a particularly cruel irony. It raises a broader question that extends well beyond one custom car shop in one American city. How many other creators and small businesses have seen years of work dismantled, not because audiences stopped caring, but because a merger, a platform shutdown, or a boardroom decision decided their fate for them without warning? Bitchin Rides became a quiet case study in exactly that kind of vulnerability, one shared by countless creators, navigating an entertainment industry undergoing constant corporate consolidation, where the biggest threat to a show's survival is no longer its content, but its ownership structure. There is something almost unsettling about realizing that a show's fate was likely sealed the moment executives in a completely different city signed off on a merger agreement, long before any conversation about the future of Bitchin Rides specifically ever took place. The people who built the show, who filmed it, who poured years of craftsmanship into every episode, had no seat at that table. Their work was simply one line item among thousands being reorganized in the aftermath of a merger measured in billions of dollars, not in the value of any single program. For a business built entirely on hands-on craftsmanship, being reduced to a spreadsheet entry in a much larger corporate calculation is a sobering reminder of how little control even successful creators sometimes have over their own destiny. It also explains why so many fans were left confused in the aftermath, searching for answers that never quite added up. When a show simply stops without a dramatic on-screen farewell or a clear explanation, viewers naturally fill in the gaps with their own assumptions, usually the simplest one available, which in this case was the assumption that interest had faded. The far less visible truth, tucked away in corporate filings and streaming platform announcements rather than entertainment headlines, took much longer to surface. And once it did, it reframed the entire ending of the show in a completely different light. The battles behind the builds. The corporate ending of the show was far from the only conflict this business faced over the years leading up to it. Long before headlines focused on merger fallout, the shop found itself entangled in a series of legal disputes that tested its resilience in very different ways, each one requiring time and money that could have gone elsewhere. In 2015, an intellectual property lawsuit involving a company called Creative Controls Inc. added legal pressure to a business already balancing the demands of television production with the day-to-day realities of running a custom shop. Around the same period, a dispute emerged with a client over a 1974 Charger, involving accusations of delays and claims of fraud. The kind of high-stakes disagreement that can emerge when a client's expectations around a custom build collide with the unpredictable realities of complex mechanical restoration work. Then came a challenge that affected nearly every business across the country, in one form or another: the economic disruption caused by COVID-19.
The global economy. It's one of the worst weeks for the Dow since the 2008 financial crisis, and we hit the streets to ask how worried you are about COVID-19's impact on the economy.
Clients facing their own financial uncertainty created ripple effects for the shop, adding yet another layer of strain during a period when many companies were simply trying to stay afloat, let alone continue producing a nationally broadcast television show. How many businesses could withstand a legal dispute, a fraud claim, and a global pandemic, all while also filming episodes on a tight production schedule with a network expecting results? None of these individual battles defined the business entirely on their own, but together, they painted a picture of a company that rarely operated without some form of external pressure testing its foundation year after year. Each dispute required time, resources, and focus that could have gone entirely into the craft of building cars and developing the next great reveal. Instead, the shop had to constantly divide its attention between creative work and legal defense, often simultaneously, without the luxury of choosing one over the other. What stands out is not that these conflicts happened. Nearly any long-running business accumulates legal and financial challenges over the course of a decade, but that the shop continued producing award-worthy builds and compelling television throughout all of it, without ever letting the turbulence show on camera. The battles behind the scenes never made it onto the screen, yet they quietly shaped the resilience of a team that would need every bit of that toughness once the show itself came to an unexpected end. There is a version of this story where any one of these individual pressures becomes the breaking point, where a lawsuit drains too much capital, where a client dispute damages the shop's reputation beyond repair, or where a pandemic-era cash crunch forces permanent downsizing.
Exiting the emergency policies of the pandemic years has been shown to have unanticipated risks.
None of that happened here. Instead, each challenge became another data point in a much longer pattern. A business that absorbed hit after hit and kept building anyway, refusing to let any single crisis define its trajectory. It is worth asking whether that same hard-earned resilience, forged years before the cameras ever arrived, is precisely what allowed the family to respond to the eventual cancellation, not with panic, but with expansion. None of these disputes were unique to this particular shop. Legal disagreements, client conflicts, and economic downturns are simply part of running any long-term business, especially one operating in the public eye. What set this business apart was not the absence of hardship, but the refusal to let hardship become the headline. Behind every polished reveal shown to television audiences sat a much messier reality of paperwork, negotiations, and quiet problem-solving that never once made it into the final edit. Life after cancellation. Most businesses built around a television show face something close to an existential crisis once the cameras stop rolling for good. This shop took a different path entirely. Instead of shrinking after the show ended, it grew, almost defiantly. The physical footprint of the business expanded to more than 27,000 square feet, a dramatic increase that reflected ambitions far beyond what television alone had ever captured on screen. Rather than treating the end of the show as a conclusion to the story, the family treated it as a transition into something they could fully control. In January of 2026, a new YouTube channel called Kindig All Access launched.
Welcome to Kindig Design. What you think you know about Kindig Design, well, you might be surprised.
Giving audiences a direct, unfiltered look into the shop's daily operations, ongoing builds, and the personalities behind them. What makes this shift particularly interesting is how audiences have responded to it. Many viewers now describe the YouTube content as feeling more authentic than the original television series ever did. Without network editing schedules, commercial breaks, or the constraints of a 40-minute broadcast format, the true rhythm of the shop comes through more clearly than it ever could within the confines of cable television. Could it be that losing the television deal actually freed this business to tell its own story more honestly than before, without a network shaping the narrative from the outside? The shop has continued participating in major industry showcases, including reveals at SEMA, one of the largest and most influential automotive events in the world, and has kept moving forward on ambitious builds like the CF1 project, proving that the creative engine behind the business never actually slowed down. Far from fading into irrelevance after cancellation, the business used the ending of one chapter to write an entirely new one, on its own terms, at its own pace, without a network dictating the schedule or the format. It raises an obvious question that extends well beyond one shop or one family. How many creators, after losing a platform they built their name on, ever manage to come back stronger rather than simply disappear? Most do not. Losing a television deal typically means losing visibility and momentum. This business appears to be one of the exceptions, and the reason may have less to do with luck than with the 27,000 square foot answer already sitting in plain sight. A team that had already survived worse and simply refused to stop building. At the center of all of it remains a family that has weathered every version of this story. Betrayal, fame, legal battles, and corporate upheaval, together, year after year. Dave and his wife Charity have been married for more than 35 years, with Charity serving as the company's vice president and chief financial officer, managing the business side, while Dave focuses on design and craftsmanship. Their children have grown into the business as well. Bailey now leads marketing efforts, helping shape how the world sees the shop, while Drew works directly in the body shop, carrying the family's hands-on tradition forward into a new generation. What began as one man fighting to keep his shop from being stolen out from under him has become a multi-generational business that refused to end when the cameras stopped rolling, and shows no signs of slowing down now. Perhaps the most telling detail in this entire story is not the size of the new facility or the reach of the new YouTube channel, but the fact that the same two people who once had to fight their way back into their own shop are now the ones steering its next chapter, decades later, on their own terms. Television gave this family a global audience. Losing that television deal gave them something arguably more valuable: full ownership of how their story gets told going forward, without a network, a merger, or an outside investor able to take that away from them ever again. A man once escorted off his own property. A show that ran 11 seasons and reached 3 continents. An ending that had nothing to do with fans, and everything to do with a boardroom decision made hundreds of miles away, and a family that turned every single setback into fuel for something bigger. That is the real story behind Bitchin Rides. Not a cancellation, but a continuation. Still being written today inside a shop 27,000 square feet strong. If this story changed how you see Dave Kindig's journey, hit like so more viewers find the truth. Subscribe for more stories the headlines never told. And tell us in the comments, which twist surprised you most?